You're watching News at Prime. Let's get into this discussion now. A Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services has released a report sounding the alarm over what it calls unlawful conditions that prisoners are being subjected to at some facilities. It says the practice of solitary confinement is seriously impacting the mental and physical well-being of inmates. The Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services inspecting judge is Edwin, who joins us this evening from Johannesburg. Justice Cameron, good evening to you and thank you for your time. That report that you released recently suggesting that there are hundreds of prisoners that are held for 23 hours a day. Why is that a major concern for you?
Ollie, thank you very much, and very good to be with you and with your viewers. The Constitution guarantees conditions of detention for everyone in detention that are consistent with human dignity. And it's accepted around the world and in our statute, the Correctional Services Act, Mandela-era statute, that dignity is necessary, but that solitary confinement is inconsistent with dignity. And solitary confinement is defined generally, internationally and locally, as being kept alone, in a cell, on your own for 23 hours without meaningful human contact. And we investigated the conditions at Ebongweni, outside Kokstad in southern KwaZulu-Natal, northern Eastern Cape, and in Pretoria CMAX. And we found that at both, the conditions were solitary confinement, which are in conflict with the Constitution and with our statute and with international norms.
Yeah. How many of these prisoners, Justice Cameron, would you say are being held in such conditions?
Only it's about 800 at Ebongweni, and it's round about 100 in Pretoria CMAX. And the conditions are severe. There are 3 stages at both locations where they say that you can progress from stage 1 to stage 2, from stage 2 to stage 3, where there is some amelioration of the conditions. But overall, some of them stay in stage 1 for a very long time. And therefore they are kept in protracted or prolonged solitary confinement, which is recognized under the International Torture Convention as a form of torture. So as we are here in our homes and our studios tonight, we say from the Judicial Inspectorate that some prisoners are being tortured by being kept for prolonged periods in solitary confinement.
We'll talk in a moment about the feelings of the people who have suffered at the hands of these very people we are talking about. But before we get there, when you say the conditions are severe, talk to us about the mental and physical state of some of these prisoners. When you say that their conditions are quite severe, what are they exhibiting? What is manifesting in their health?
They spoke to us. We visit Ebongweni and CMAX regularly. Colleagues of mine from Sticks went to CMAX just last month. I went the previous month, where I saw Mr. Radovan Preacher, I saw Mr. Thabo Bester in Pretoria CMAX. And the prisoners speak to us. And in Ebongweni, they make very vivid statements, which we don't think are overstated, that you lose your humanity, you lose your sense of time, we know, the apartheid government, when I was growing up and when I was a young practitioner at the bar, were keeping its opponents, anti-apartheid activists, in solitary confinement, and their testimonies were before Archbishop Tutu in the TRC. So we have our own history of how repugnant solitary confinement is. Now, the question is it consistent with our ideals and aims as a democracy? And we say they are inconsistent and that we should stop this. We aren't saying to the department fully that they've got to put these people in cotton wool and bring them hot chocolate every hour. We're saying look after them carefully, keep them securely, apply appropriate conditions, but not torture and not prolonged solitary confinement and not the conditions that we see even before it becomes torture. Those conditions, we say, are unacceptable.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned at least two individuals, Thabo Bester and Radovan Krejcir. The crimes that these two people have committed, if we look at the one who has been most talked about recently, Thabo Bester, he went into prison in the first place for rape and murder, and there is an attempted break from prison, which is ultimately successful, and add to that the fact that a body is found in his prison cell, which in a way was meant to dupe the officials into thinking that this was him having now died under that or in that fire in the prison cell. A person listening tonight is saying, these are not the signs of a human being who has been rehabilitated. These are not the signs of a person who appears to understand the damage he may have caused the families of the people who are no longer alive today. So why should we feel for Thabo Bester, for example?
It's an excellent question. And I humble myself every time I meet a survivor of crime or a relative of a terrible criminal attack. I humble myself and I keep quiet because I have only awe for the horror that many people have experienced and the horror that they feel. So we have to punish appropriately, but appropriate punishment doesn't include inhumane methods. Collie, if I can just go back for a moment and pick up something that you said. The body in Thabo Bester's cell in Mangaung Max, which was a privately run prison, wasn't meant to dupe the officials because the officials were in on that. That is one of the big outrages, that he must have had massive official support, personnel support, not only those on duty. There were 21 Mangaung officials on duty that night. Yeah. He must have had much more wide support. So it was meant to dupe me and you and the public, and he didn't succeed in doing that. But I want to add one other thing, Polly, if I may, yes, which is that both Mr. Bester and Mr. Krejcir are high escape risks. So there are various good reasons why you want to put people in secure cells, and we recognize that. The one is that they may be a danger to other prisoners. We know that there are gang bosses who are running gangster activities from inside their cells in the Cape Flats. So there are dangerous people who are doing dangerous things outside prisons. Yeah. The second aspect is the escape risk, which is very real. At one point, Mr. Krejcir is alleged to have had a helicopter waiting for him. And as you just said, the most outrageous, the most stunning escape in the history of South African prisons was perpetrated just a year or two ago by Mr. Bester. And then the third aspect you raised, Collie, and which I must get to because it's a profound point you make, which is this aspect of justice, of vengeance, of talion, of retribution for the terrible things that are done. Yeah. And our system says that your deprivation of liberty, your deprivation of the choice of how to lead your life is your punishment, and not being subjected to indignities and to inhumane conditions.
Let's talk alternatives to solitary confinement, because your report does go into some detail as to the recommendations here proposing these alternatives. When you say that not subjecting prisoners to long-term solitary confinement unless, and this is for me the caveat, unless it is truly necessary for safety and security. So is it permissible in certain instances, therefore?
In very rare instances, probably, but even then, we say, and we've made submissions to the department, we've said, we asked them to give us their standard operating procedures, to give us their protocols. We fear that solitary confinement is being abused, and that people are transferred there when they are inconvenient, when they are witnesses. So there are all sorts of very difficult questions about how solitary confinement is applied. So we agree that where it is applied properly, it may be justified to keep someone in a very safe and secure cell away from other prisoners, but you can still ameliorate it. For example, now, if you are in those solitary confinement conditions that we express ourselves against, that we condemn, you are allowed out for 1 hour a day. But you don't go and socialize, you don't get to stretch your legs and comfort. You exercise in what we call a cage. And the department says, no, it's not a cage. Well, we went and looked. We went and looked in Edwin, we went and looked in Pretoria CMAX. It's a cage. It's a big cage, and you're lucky if there's a bit of sky above, but it's a cage. And you don't have contact with anyone in that hour. So we've made submissions to the department. Give them more telephone calls, give them more visits, keep the visitors behind a thick glass pane if you have to, but give them more visitors and give them more telephone calls and allow them some contact with other prisoners under certain conditions. If they're going to get involved in gang fights or exchange gang information, then you've got to prevent that, and there are ways of preventing it. We don't live in cloud cuckoo land in the Judicial Inspectorate. We are hard-headed, but we want the Constitution and the statute to be applied properly. And we say right now it is not, neither of them is being applied properly.
Yeah. You would have heard Justice Cameron recently, Thabo Bester representing himself before a high court, trying to gain access to a laptop, he said, and this was going to be for him to prepare for his upcoming case. But there is worry that that computer could well be used for nefarious ends, and the strong suggestion is that he may have monies kept somewhere, and therefore this would be a form of accessing that money using the very electronic equipment that he is looking for. When you had that conversation with him as to the conditions he is kept under, because I don't imagine for a second that you may have discussed the laptop situation, but if you did discuss it, feel free to tell us what his real reasoning is for wanting a laptop, because I guess someone could say, why don't you give him books to read if he is kept for such long hours in order to just, I guess, exercise his brain?
Let me start with the books, Claudia. I'm very glad that you mentioned it. A smart point that I should have brought in earlier. There's a trolley in Pretoria Central that comes round every 2 weeks with totally insufficient books. So these prisons are kept in conditions where there is not sufficient reading material. There's no television. And so we say one of the submissions we've made is that give them more books. Now, to get back to your main question about Mr. Bester, I have no reason to think that he's anything other than a clever man. The amazing escape plan that he hatched with his confederates, and we know who some of them are charged, those were astounding plans. So we must infer that he's a clever person. He wants to study, he says. And I listened to part of that argument, and the judge in Pretoria, who didn't want to be identified very understandably or to be shown on television, took a very hard-headed approach. And I fully respect what my colleague in the Pretoria High Court did. The Pretoria High Court said, you can have books for your law studies. You are entitled to have your study books with you, but no laptop. And I appreciate and I respect that decision. I didn't speak to Mr. Bester about his laptop, but there is a bigger case, which I think your viewers will be interested in. It's the Ntuli case, which came from Leeuwkop. And Leeuwkop has got study facilities for inmates, but they're not allowed to have their laptops with them outside the computer room. And why? The department says that if they take them into the cells, there's going to be illegal cell phones in. They're going to create hotspots. They're going to be able to communicate even outside the cells. Now, why do the prisoners have illegal cell phones? When we see on morning television that there's been a fantastic raid by the departmental officials, they've recovered all this money and all these cell phones and all these other items. Where do they come from? They come from the personnel. That's the problem, that it is corrupt personnel who are bringing cell phones into the prison. So that has to be stopped. If you can stop that, then Mr. Ntuli and others will be able to use their laptops, not their cell phones, in their cells.
Yeah.
And Paul, just let me tell your viewers that Mr. Ntuli got an order from the Johannesburg High Court. The department appealed it to the Supreme Court of Appeal. And my inspector, Jix, joined as an amicus, as a friend of the court, made our submissions. A unanimous judgment of 5 judges, written by Judge David Unterhalter, said yes, he must be allowed his laptop under prescribed conditions without outside connectivity inside his cell. And now the department has appealed to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court has said it will hear the application for leave to appeal, and we'll see what my former colleagues in the Constitutional Court do. But we say that students in ordinary conditions in most correctional centers across the country should be able to use their laptops for various persuasive reasons that Mr. Ntuli made in his application, and which the department couldn't deny, which is that the study times are short. They have to be able to study for the long periods of lockup.
You're watching News at Prime. If you're just joining us, we are wrapping up a conversation with the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services. They recently put out a report sounding the alarm over what they are saying are unlawful conditions under which prisoners are being kept 23 hours a day in isolation. And the Inspectorate is saying this amounts to solitary confinement, which is outlawed not only in our country but internationally. All right, let's wrap up this conversation then with Justice Edwin Cameron. Justice Cameron, let's end this conversation on this note. Recently, you would have seen a report. In fact, it went viral because this was a social media post by one of the prisoners, as you made reference to earlier, which prompted one of the many raids that have since been conducted. A prisoner in Cape Town, one of the prisons there, bragging about just how beautiful life is inside prison. Now, you can imagine how that makes people whom these prisoners, they've wreaked havoc in their lives, seeing that kind of imagery where prisoners are saying they almost live in hotel-like conditions. I suppose that's just being extreme. But the point here being made is that prisoners do tend to live a slightly better life than a person who perhaps would live in a shack dwelling where they have electricity all night, they have warm water, access to food, and this is something that would possibly be difficult to come by for a person who really does not have the means to make a living. So my question to you is, why should prisoners be allowed civil liberties when they think they have the right to take someone else's life?
It's such a good question, Polly, and the only answer to it is that the way we treat the people we lock up for the terrible things they do reflects on our own humanity. As we sit here, as we listen here, as we participate in this question and answer tonight, we are affected by the fact that there are 155,000 people that we lock up, the 12th highest in the world, the highest number in Africa. And it's not true that they have hot water. Many, many people on these icy nights in jail don't have hot water at all. And I want to say that that young man who was very garrulous, he just carried on speaking. And I saw the very foolish young man, and he's been made to pay for it. He gave a completely wrong representation of what happens inside prison. But your point remains that nevertheless, they have shelter. They have a judicial inspectorate who complains on their behalf if they don't get adequate food or adequate blankets. That is all true. And that is because the severe punishment that is inflicted on them is taking away their human right to decide how they're going to live, where they're going to live, where they're going to move, and how they're going to move. That is the consequence of imprisonment. And everything on top of that is something that affects how we should see ourselves as citizens of a constitutional democracy that is committed to human dignity. The founding value of our democracy after all those years of apartheid and white supremacism before that is human dignity. And prisoners also are entitled to it, no matter what they've done. And if we say that we don't want to let those who've done terrible things escape terrible things being happening to them also, then I think we are on a wrong path.
Justice Edwin Cameron, I want to thank you very much for your time tonight, and thanks indeed for allowing us this opportunity to discuss the report you released recently. All right. Well, listening to that conversation is Correctional Services Department spokesperson Singabakho Nxumalo, who is here to respond to what this report has found. Mr. Nxumalo, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. There are two specific prisons that had a mention tonight. It is the Kgosimampuru Cimex prison in Pretoria and eBhongweni Cimex prison in Kokstad. The conditions under which prisoners are held there, 23 hours a day, and the judge says that this is inconsistent with their dignity. How do you respond?
A very good evening, Holly, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to also state our side of the story. I think firstly, it's important to highlight that comparing our facilities to what then used to happen during apartheid is really pushing it too far. What we have today is by far different from what happened during those years, and we wouldn't even want to go back there. South Africa has two Supermax correctional facilities. It is eBhongweni in Kokstad, others call it eBhongweni, and Cimex at Kgosimampuru, the second correctional facilities. And these are Supermax. What do we mean by Supermax facilities? These are not correctional centers of first instance, meaning no inmate walks from court straight to these facilities, but you are referred there. Why so? It is because of the risk classification. But even if that risk classification is so high that you are a danger to other human beings, it is not correct that South Africa practices solitary confinement. And you've engaged with the Judicial Inspectorate here. We have quarterly meetings, and we do take their reports seriously, and we do share information. And where Jake says to us, look into these practices, see if perhaps there's something that could be done either to relax some of the conditions. We do look into it and to see how best can we then work around that. Yeah. Why are we saying there's no solitary confinement in South Africa? There is no inmate that is kept for 23 hours a day without meaningful engagement. Why do we say that? An inmate will get 1 hour exercise if that inmate is in phase 1 at a Supermax. After that 1 hour exercise, that inmate will still get time to go take a shower. After that, the inmate is then allowed to access services of specialists to seek audience with a social worker, be it a psychologist, educationist, and other specialist. Or if that inmate will want to make a phone call or receive a visit. And we're saying you look at all these things. You cannot confine them to just 1 hour and say a person is therefore spending 23 hours a day without meaningful engagement.
Let's talk about the exercise. The judge says that looking at that particular exercise, that 1 hour exercise they are given, they say it is in a cage. It's not even in an open space. It's in a cage. Is that true?
And we've responded to that. I think in some interviews, the judge does refer to the response that we've provided. Here, we are not keeping the type of an offender that we'll find at a medium classified facility or even at a maximum facility. These are inmates who are referred to these 2 centers by other facilities. Why are they there? They are going there for behavioral modification programs. So therefore, mixing them up with other inmates before being assessed will pose a high risk danger even to other offenders, let alone even talking about our own officials. You then have protected spaces where you will then allow them that exercise. Then just calls those areas cages. We are saying it is not cages because it is an area which is well secured. It is in the open where a person is able to at least get to enjoy direct sunlight, is able to exercise freely, and protected even from other offenders who may even attack that person. But why do we have to mention this? It is not like a person will stay there until he's moved to another facility. There are different phases. When you move from phase 1 to phase 2, we then start introducing them to start working in groups. And then when they get to phase 3, that's where they even start to exercise maybe in 3s or in 6s, depending on that risk classification. But there is a process which is well structured and well coordinated so that a person appreciates the need to say, there is a need for me to change so that I can move from level 1 to level 2 and level 3, where they can even start even sharing cells, so that by the time an inmate has spent whatever amount of time that is due to be served at the supermax, you can then send the person to the center of origin, at least having been changed.
In a case where an inmate has behaved badly, and what I mean by that is that this person would have gotten into prison not for that terrible a crime, but nonetheless they are imprisoned. But they decide to take a cell phone, make a video of themselves, suggesting that prison is basically almost hotel living. You will know the case I'm referring to in the Western Cape. That person...
They're talking about on-face banks.
Indeed, indeed. And that person went and was punished. My understanding is that he may have been subjected to these isolation sort of cells. The argument here, the argument by the judge is that in the first place, for that inmate to have gained access to a gadget like a cell phone and was able to post, the problem starts with the prison officials. What is being done about the behavior of prison officials who allow for these gadgets to enter the prison environment in the first place?
Okay, I think there is a need to clarify something here. The Supermax is not a facility where we just take any person to say, because you've caused an uproar or you have committed another offense, therefore I'm taking you there. These two facilities will only accommodate inmates that are really a challenge, not just to society, even to themselves and to other inmates. Inmates whose classification does pose a high security risk, meaning that they are a serious threat, then they will be taken there strictly for behavioral modification programs. But someone who has been caught with a cell phone saying other things, that person, let's say if you were kept in a medium classified center, you will then be moved to a maximum classified facility where you will lose some of the privileges. So I think we need to be clear about that.
All right.
But then the department has been acting and harshly slow against our own officials who are caught on the wrong side of the law, those who continue to embarrass us, those who even think that by working with criminals, in a way, they will perhaps modify their lives. We're saying, no, there is a reason why you are called a correctional official. Then if you decide that you now want to engage and work with offenders in their criminal behavior, unfortunately, you don't deserve to wear this uniform. We do not just dismiss you, we even open a criminal case against you. We continue to do so. So as a department, it's something which does pain us, but we are saying we're not going to give up. We will get these dirty officials out. It's not many of them, it's only a few, but even if it is 1, 2, or 3, even if it's 20 of them, we will not hesitate to act against them.